Hello. One of the most recognisable faces in modern Games Workshop history emerged as much as a decade ago when Warhammer TV first appeared on YouTube. My guest today was one of the first painting presenters on the channel, having held a number of roles at Games Workshop's head office and in retail beforehand, where he learned how to be a calm, confident, and compelling teacher of painting techniques. With the evolution of Warhammer community, a growing fan base online, and the common sense mantra of two thin coats, he left Games Workshop and co-founded his own painting company, where he has helped develop aspiring painters' techniques and skills by the thousands. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today I'm in conversation with Duncan Rhodes. Duncan, thank you for joining me. I'm interested in sort of hearing about your first steps in the hobby, I suppose, and starting there. So how did you get started with Warhammer and Games Workshop?
Oh, well, thank you for having me. So I was into model making. I love doing model kits. So my dad introduced this to me for Christmas when I was really young. He got me some Airfix kits, and I had so much fun putting them together because I just liked making stuff like Lego and things like that. And as I grew, I then encountered Star Wars, and then I realized you could get Star Wars model kits, and I was like, science fiction model kits, that's so cool, and it also, oh yeah, there was Thunderbird model kits too, and I was a bit younger. Remember getting those, and I thought all this was awesome. So when we'd go out places at the weekend, usual thing to do is if there was a model shop in the town, we'd go and have a look, and I'd like get some cheap secondhand model kit, like for 50p or something. And so we went into this one in a town called Ashby de la Zouch, which is in Derbyshire, and in there they had those, pop-up stands that Games Workshop has, where there'll be like some starter sets, paint sets, and things.
Sure.
I can't remember what products were in it, but they had a leaflet that you could take away for free, which was a combination of the How to Play booklet from second edition 40k and fifth edition Fantasy. So it had like the Elves and Goblins and then the Space Marines versus the Orcs. Well, I thought the Space Marines were just hands down the coolest thing I'd seen in my life, right? Because they look like someone had taken Darth Vader because with the helmet piece and combined them with stormtroopers and made like these awesome looking soldiers with guns and things. And I was like, that's so cool. Why would anyone like the Orcs? It's the Marines are cool, right? So I got so excited about this thing, and at the back it had this page where it was talking about all the different chapters. So things like the Minotaurs are on there, and Legion of the Damned, and all these things. And I just carried this thing around with me for the whole week. And my dad said that he thought he'd seen a Games Workshop on Saddlegate in Derby, and next Saturday he'd take me down there. So down we went, and I'd got £5 pocket money saved up, and I went in, and it just blew my mind seeing this stuff. The idea of taking the model making, but for a purpose, and that you're building an army. And because it was science fiction, it was just such like I didn't know what I was going to see. It was all just like constant imagination and stuff. So I bought a box of Space Marines. It was the Warriors of the Imperium box set, where you got six, they're like multi-part ones. And my dad bought me a pot of Skull White, a pot of Chaos Black, and a fine detail brush. So I went home and off I went making these things, and I had so much fun. And I painted these models atrociously. I made a per color scheme that was based on stormtroopers, and I had some Humbrol enamel paints from my model making. So I painted one of the shoulders yellow because I thought, has a stripe look really cool. So I put them on a shoulder, and these became my Space Marines, who are called the Imperial Skulls, is what I call. Actually, no, I called them Stormtroopers before I found out that Stormtroopers were in the Imperial Guard. So then they became the Imperial Skulls, which is like a rubbish name, but but that's what they were. And I had tons of fun just painting them, and then it all kind of expanded from there. I just ate up more and more of it as time went along. But it was I would always would paint my armies with an idea to play the game, but I never really did in second edition. It wasn't until third edition that I actually got a proper game in. But yeah, it's great. Dad really encouraged it. He surprised me one evening where I'd had this exam at school and I'd done quite well. And he got home and he'd stopped off in the Birmingham store on the way back and bought us tickets to Games Day. And he was like, well done, lad. We're going to Games Day next weekend. And I was like, oh my God, And it was brilliant. We went over there and just blew my mind. It was when Gorka Morka was coming out.
Right.
So yeah, and they were giving away all the free sprues and all this stuff. And got to go next year as well, and they're starting 40k third edition. Man, I loved it, absolutely loved it. It was like my life for a whole host of years up until I got to my GCSEs where I didn't have time for it.
Sure, yeah. I mean, Games Day during that era as well was quite an event. There was loads to see and
Mm.
do in those big Games Day in
Mm.
Birmingham, right?
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. It felt there was a real excitement to it. I thought, it, you didn't know what was going to be there because they do things like take plastic injection molding machines and they'd have them there and they'd be pumping out sprues for stuff. Like one year they were putting out the sprues of the Dark Eldar warriors. So we joined the queue. We both got given a sprue of these warriors, and they weren't out for like 2 months at that point up until then. So we went round. Both Dad and I got a sprue. Then we went round again and got another sprue each. And I suddenly had the core of a Dark Eldar army. This was ages before it came out. They also announced. I hadn't become aware of they were about to release third edition 40k, but it was all about it when we were there. And they brought forward the new tactical squad, and they were going to release it early. And it was only £10. And they said to everybody, right at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they're going to go on sale. And I remember us waiting, and they went on sale, and the staff members were just getting out like these massive stacks of tactical squad boxes, and people were going berserk for these things, right? And we saw this happening, and I was like, "Oh, they look amazing!" And Dad like gets £10 out of his wallet. He's like, "Quick, go on, don't go get one!" And he like sort of pushes me under the crowd. So I managed to, because I was quite small then, I managed to get to the front, reach out, stuff the money into the guy's hand, and grab a box. And I came back like, it was so awesome. Yeah, it was great. I always I wonder if it's the nostalgia of the time that makes it so special in my mind, or if that is an era that's kind of past. I don't
Mm.
really know, but I loved it. It was such a highlight for me in the year to go there. It was just a great day out with my dad and I, and I'll always remember those times.
Yeah, yeah, and it is hard to separate the nostalgia from the
Mm.
reality, and we'll never know for
Yeah,
sure, right? But
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it was a great time. Was it all 40k? Was that where your attention was for that period?
It was at first, but then it wasn't that long till I started getting interested in fantasy. And it was the release of the Chaos Warriors box that got my attention because I was a bit intimidated by painting skin. Right, so what I wanted was soldiers wearing full suits of armor. So when they brought out the Chaos Warriors, head to toe in this plate armor, I thought, again, they were really cool, and I loved the fact I could build them together in different combinations and pose them how I liked and stuff. So I remember getting the White Dwarfs, and actually we were on holiday, if I remember right, when I had the White Dwarf, where it was the one after that set came out, and they had a load of articles about it and how to convert them and stuff. And along with that, there were some of the Chaos models that they were bringing out for the Realm of Chaos book. And I was like, man, that all looks really cool. So I actually made a little Chaos Warrior army. So I bought this box when I got home, saved my pocket money, bought that. I bought like 2 blue horrors. I had a sorcerer and stuff. And I, I I only played with it once. I came into the store for a big game and put my Chaos Warriors there. They advanced. They got charged by a unit of Bretonian Knights in lance formation, and the staff member just told me to roll the dice and then told me to take them all off the board. I don't know what's going on. Like, oh, all right then. So that was my experience of playing fantasy. But it got me to look at it, whereas previously I hadn't been looking at it. And then more and more I started looking at the core game, the fifth edition core game. And I, when my birthday came along, I got a load of spending money, and I went in, and that's what I got. Well, actually, what I bought is a bit of story there. I went in, and the staff members were all going crazy about Blood Bowl, and they talked me into buying Blood Bowl. And I got home and I opened it, and I was like, "This isn't what I wanted. I wanted to buy Warhammer Fantasy. I want knights, and I've got football players." And I got really upset about it. I
Right.
didn't know what to do. Anyway, my mum saw this, and she got on the phone, and she had a go with the staff members for telling me this thing. And she then hopped in the car and drove back, and she drove back with the thing I actually wanted to get. So that was amazing. And yeah, that set made me fall in love with Bretonians, which have been my favorite army ever since.
Right. Well, that's great. Yeah. So was that the same store that you'd gone in that first time and got the leaflet from? And then is that the same store
Hmm.
that you ended up first working at when you joined Games Workshop?
No, it wasn't. This shop in Ashby was just a little model shop, selling like model trains and planes and all that sort of stuff. Whereas the Games Workshop, the one in Derby, the one where I first bought that box set, that's became like my local shop.
Right.
And So the staff would change a fair bit back then, but the guy who sold me that original box set was then a more senior retail manager when I turned 18. And when I applied for the job, it was him that hired me. And he, of course, couldn't remember me at all. But this store was the one that I'd always go to as a kid. And then, yeah, it's the one I started working at, which was quite a strange experience. It was fascinating for me the first time I went in the back through the staff door, where they just disappeared to spray things. And then I got to see what the alley looked like at the back, and what the upstairs looked like and the downstairs and things. And there's like a basement, and if it every now and then it would flood, and our stock would be down there, and you have to go and rescue the stock.
I mean, what was the sort of culture and the feel of working in the sort of retail stores at that time?
So it's very different to how it is now, because back then each store was more of like a little island, and
Mm.
you'd have lots of old products like they didn't sell; they'd still just linger there. So you had a black library section, for lack of a better term. But what it would be is like the place where you'd have a copy of the War Master rulebook, which might have gone off sale at that point, but it's still there. And you'd have random little blister packs of things. They had every shop had a thing like that,
Mm.
and like random odds and ends, and that was really cool. And it was I think a thing that managers understood as well as being like a fun, interesting thing. It made it whatever town you were in, you'd want to go to that shop because it would be
Mm.
different to the other ones. Um, the staff that were working in Derby when I joined there, I think I was very lucky because they were all really decent guys, and I ended up making really good friends with all of them, and I talk to all of them still today, and we almost became a gaming club in a way, and this then like they encouraged it as being a locus of the hobby community in the area, so that you'd make these personal connections with people, so they'd come in to show you what they'd just painted, and
Mm.
it'd be more than just trying to sell stuff. Now, this was the time when the Lord of the Rings bubble was definitely happening, because I joined retail shortly before the Return of the King came out, and when I was trained for it, the attitude was you shouldn't be power selling to people. You shouldn't
Right.
be trying to force them to take product and things. Instead, what you should do is engage them in a conversation to work out what will make their hobby better. So if that means buying an expensive thing, you'd recommend they buy the expensive thing. But if they weren't sure, you'd be like, well, why don't you just go and have a coffee and have a think about it, and then
Mm.
come back and see how you feel about it, and stuff like that. And that developed these good connections with people. Whether it made a lot of money, I can't really say. Like I don't know really, because that's what I was trained to do. So that's just what I did. But what I can say is that when it got to things like Christmas, you'd know the parents of the regular kids who'd come in,
Mm.
and the parents would trust you to look after the kids when they were out shopping or something like that. And what you'd do is talk to the kid about what stuff they liked, and you'd subtly make notes. So when the parent came in, you'd be
Mm.
like, right, what they want to collect is this army here, right? They really like the idea of starting an orc army. So they like that model. So we think this combination of stuff would be really cool for them. So this is a load of stuff that comes back 100 quid. If you want to spend a bit more, there's this. If you want to spend a bit more, there's this. It's your call. What would you like to do? And often they go, yeah, I'll take it all. And so you go, okay, sit down there in the little seating space we had, and we'd always have two staff members there. There was no one-man store stuff. So one of us would stay with the parent and basically make him a cup of tea and give him a biscuit and like,
Mm.
so how's it going? And the other one would go around and collect all the stuff and run it through the till for them. So we were explicitly told not to put up Christmas decorations either, so that it'd be like a little island of tranquility. And
Right.
so that parents would be nice and calm, then you'd have to go out and battle the rest of the elements with their Christmas shopping. So uh, it was, I guess, if you go into a games workshop now, you see it's not quite like that anymore.
Mm.
But yeah, that's what it was like up until I think maybe a year or two after the Lord of the Rings bubble burst, and then it started changing more to how you see it nowadays, where stores have become a little bit more sales focused, and they become a little bit more consistent in their product offering.
Mm.
So yeah, I'm really nostalgic for those early days. It was great and stuff like that.
Yeah.
We had really good times. Lots of regulars. We did one night where it was one of the kids' birthdays, so we kept the shop open late and did a big mega Lord of the Rings game for them.
Wow.
And this was around when all the Haradrim came out, so we had the Mumak on the table for the first time, and it was like a big game, but it was almost a private event, and all the parents brought their kids down, and we all had a great time. So yeah, I do miss doing stuff like that. That was really fun.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds amazing, and definitely a specific era in the sort of
Mm,
the retail story of Games Workshop when it sort of achieved that. I mean, that was very very similar to my experiences as a customer, I think, of
mm,
GW. Did you
mhm.
find that your relationship with the hobby changed when you sort of crossed the Rubicon, as it were, and became a member of staff?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I think so. It certainly changed much more when I got into head office.
Mm,
When I was in retail, you suddenly are surrounded by this stuff all the time and people who love it. And the guys in the shop I was with, um, were all very creative, and a number of them were really into the lore. And one of them was especially into the Warhammer Fantasy stuff, so he was very much a driving force for that. So he taught me really how to play it,
mm,
and the other guys were into it too. So we started finding ourselves exploring things with like really fun things. So um, we got to do stuff like when the Storm of Chaos was coming along, there was like a campaign encouraged to basically get people to do a new army for the Storm of Chaos. So we're going to do the first month, we want to get to 500 points, then 750 and escalate it like that. And we got in on it as well as all the people who were taking part. And it was
right.
all, we had about, I think, 3 different clubs that we'd do, like for the younger kids, the teenagers, and the adults. And we were doing this all the way through. And that was something I hadn't really engaged in before, because my hobby before that had been very private, where it was just me doing my thing.
Mm,
But now it was like, cool, we've got some great ideas. And so I was trying to do a Tomb King's army with a Roman theme at the time,
right.
which obviously doesn't necessarily fit with the Games Workshop IP, but I was converting all of my skeletons to like have Roman legionary shields and stuff. And people were giving me ideas of like, oh, why don't you use some of the Necron Catan to be like mobile statues for your Shabti? That's a great idea. So I hadn't experienced that yet. So that was really cool. We did one campaign when Storm of Chaos happened, when the Demon Legion army list came out,
Mm,
and 4 of us all did a different Demon Legion. And so I had Zinch, and that was again really cool because we all played a big game where we all got the stuff together, and that was really exciting. Um, yeah, I think really my hobby came alive when I was working in retail.
mm,
I think it's when it really grew. When I got into head office, that's when you see behind the curtain more, and you see how these things are developed. And there's some things then that you go, oh, that's really cool, and other things where you're like, no, that's not quite so cool. And I think now back to the mystique of before I started working at Workshop at all, back when it's like the, I don't know, 5th edition Warhammer Fantasy, and everything feels like magic to me, like the whole thing.
mm,
Whereas when it comes to more modern stuff, it doesn't have quite that same depth to me anymore.
mm.
So yeah, not saying it's bad or anything. It's just different, and I do wonder if people who have never worked at Games Workshop feel the same way about it, because
Right.
it's hard for me to tell, having been around all this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, when was that move to head off? What was that with a view to doing that you actually moved from retail into the sort of more corporate side, I guess?
So I, like most people, have never really had a plan in life, I think, and so I only started working in retail because it was meant to be a summer job. So what I'd actually done is so I sort of dropped out of it a little bit when I was doing all my exams and stuff. And I got through doing my A levels and I got the results and I applied to university and I got a placement doing an archaeology degree in Winchester, I think it was. Because I loved history, but I wanted to do more hands-on stuff, right?
Hmm.
And to celebrate, a friend of mine and we went to the cinema, and Terminator 3 was on at the cinema. And when I was watching it, I was like, well, I've got nothing to do this summer. And that reminds me, I wonder if anything's happened with Necrons, because Necrons are cool. Um, so I looked it up and I saw that whilst I'd not been paying attention, the whole Necron range had been refreshed to the more recognizable version of what you see today. Because before that, it was the robots with like the funny big metal eyebrows and all this kind of stuff,
Sure.
right? So I was like, that's amazing. So I went into the store and that's where I met Chris Peach. And he sold me a box of Necron Warriors. And off I went and painted them up. And I then got back into the hobby via there. And I was like, I need a summer job. So I asked about it and I got it. And I loved it so much that I ended up just not bothering going to university, which Dad wasn't happy about. But I ended up just staying there because I was happy.
Hmm.
Um, and I only left because the culture had changed, where it become much more sales focused, and I'm just not very good at that. So in the end, it was like this isn't really for me anymore. So I left. Um, the shift over to head office then only happened a bit over a year later because Chris had left and ended up working at Warhammer World as a retail thing. 'Cause he was my manager at the store, you see, for a while.
Right.
And then he got a job in the studio. And he messaged me saying, well, they're advertising an heavy metal job. You might be interested in that, because he was having a great time. He's thinking it's awesome. People are cool. It's like it's really fun again, and it's not sales focused anymore. It's about just doing the cool thing. It's like how it used to be. So I was
Right.
really excited about that. So I applied, and I got nowhere on the heavy metal job application. That's just not what I do, right? I'm not good enough for that. But very shortly afterwards, an opportunity for the hobby team came up, and this is where Chris was working, and he was like, you'd be really good at this. So I applied for that, and I got it. I nearly messed it up, but I got the job. And so suddenly I found myself in head office, and so it just sort of happened. I never planned it. I never thought for a minute I'd be there. And when I got the offer for the job, I was so happy, man. I was like, I remember phoning my mum up being like, oh my God, I'm going to work at Lenton. I'm going to see what the design studio looks like. Yeah. Yeah, like most things that have happened to me in life, it just sort of happened from me being in the right place at the right time. And I think I've only really taken any more initiative over the last, 12 years, I suppose. As things came along. But yeah, like I said, just kind of happened.
Yeah. I mean, was it true what Peachy had said that it was exciting again and fun again? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
what did it feel the same, or did it feel fun in a different way to when you'd first started at retail?
Um, it it was fun in a different way, I think. There was definitely that excitement back there because so when I first started, they were getting ready for 8th edition Warhammer. So there was a real excited buzz going on for Warhammer Fantasy. And by this point, Fantasy had taken over as my favorite game from 40K. And that was really exciting to see that development. It's like, oh, welcome to your first day. We've got tons of high elves. We just want you to build and paint lots of them for photographs. All right, wicked, cool. And I'm sat with other people who are all doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And we're just like, oh, let's put on an audiobook and all listen to it together as we're all painting our miniatures and things. And, it definitely had that raw excitement going on for that. And the Empire, it was either just about to come out or just had come out. And this was the ones where they did the steam tank in plastic and the great
Right.
swords in plastic, right? And at this point, what they do is make test sprues. They're called test shots. And they'd made loads and loads of these things. And they had a communal recycling bin where people would put used sprues in, or like leftover sprues. And so in these bins were tons of steam tanks and great swords and archers, like all the new stuff. And people were taking them out and doing stuff with them and making empire armies and converting and things. So that gaming club atmosphere was there. But now it was people like Ali Morrison doing it, and the Perry twins were there and stuff. So all these people I've been reading about all these years, they were there and they were excited about it. So it was like um, it was almost dreamlike for someone like me who'd been into it that much to suddenly be in that environment. Um, and it was really, really cool. Really cool. There was as 8th edition came out, Jervis started running a map campaign where he picked an area of the old world and he was fleshing it out. And he wrote up the rules for the Dogs of War to be in it, so all the mercenary units. So I had them, like, well, some of them. So I dug them out, and so I was using the Dogs of War in 8th edition, like with this stuff. And it was like, these aren't rules that we're putting out to the public, but it's a bit of fun. So cool, Yeah, I suppose, yeah, it was really like stars in my eyes for a while. Yeah, it was really cool.
I mean, was there also? I'm guessing there would be some stuff that came from those sort of internal campaigns and games and all that sort of club activity that
Mm.
did make it into the public in White Dwarf or otherwise. I mean, did that give things a different flavor as well? Is like this potential that you're influencing the world in some way?
Well, I don't really think I influenced the world or like the IPs or anything like that because my job was basically to provide supporting content for White Dwarf and things like that,
Mm,
and the army books and stuff. So we paint like back ranks for units. But we did see how there was a relationship between the sculptors and the rules writers. So nowadays, what happens is the miniature is made and then everything comes from that. But at this time, the rules were also considered to be like a key part of this. And so things like the Minotaurs, when they sculpted those, they did them with loads of big muscles. And so the rules writers looked at them and went, oh, they don't really look like they're strength 4. They look like they're strength 5. We'll make them strength 5. But then there'd be pushback in how the units would operate, and then that would change how the miniatures were sculpted, so they'd form up in different ways. So it was like quite a symbiotic relationship. So that was really cool to see that. And it meant that it was a real good space for ideas to then grow. And they wouldn't necessarily come from people like me, right? Would just be happy just doing what I was doing every day. But there was a project that I worked on at one time, which was for a town codex. And at this point, I was being encouraged to take a bit more ownership of projects. So I was assigned to do the right? The B army. So heavy metal was doing the main one, the classic ochre style tau. And they're like, right, so we want a secondary army. What do you think it'd be called, Duncan? And I was like, well, Commander Farsight's coming out with a new model, so maybe we should do a Commander Farsight army because we've never seen that before.
Hmm.
And then this caused lots of confusion because people were like, yeah, but Commander Farsight's not about the greater good. And will this confuse the project? Will people not like it? So it got ground to me only doing half an army and then having to do a bunch of the ochre ones to add onto the heavy metal ones. But I was able to do a bit of the Farsight stuff. And Phil Kelly thought it was really cool, like the models I'd made and the poses, because I converted the poses a bit and tried to play around with them. And so when he got to do the project on the Commander Farsight Codex, he looked at the models I made and went, I'm going to make them into special characters. And so all the 8 came from these figures that I just happened to make. So I remember this one has 2 fusion blasters where I can make them into like flame swords. And that was just his idea based upon the guy I'd made with 2 fusion blasters, which I thought looked cool. So that's about as much influence as I've ever had on IP. But I know that so Peachy also made up his own guard regiment, the Ventrilian Nobles, and they really liked that. And so one day a piece of artwork came out by that. So the opportunity was there. And I think in hindsight, I maybe could have tried to do something, but I just had my blinkers on, was just happy to do my thing, really.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating stuff how that sort of relationship and the development of those different things coming from all these different schools of the sort of hobby, I suppose.
Yeah,
They can all influence what finally gets onto the shelves. But
absolutely. What I can say, I think so from when I was on like the public perspective, you don't know how into it the writers and people were. At that time, I can't. It's been 4 years since I've left, right? So I can't say for words like right now. But the time when I was there, I can absolutely guarantee that all the people who were writing this stuff and all the people who were into it were really into it and loved it. Right? You've never been in a pitch meeting as exciting as one when someone like Phil Kelly's hosting it and he's explaining to you what the ideas are for the next army. Like, man, I was in the meeting he had for Bretonians for 8th edition, right, where they were talking about what they were going to do to them, and it was like this blew my mind because it's my favorite faction. The reason why I was invited was because I was like the Bretonian fan nerd guy, right? So I was just there to be like, oh my god, like and say what I liked and what it felt like. But it was awesome to see how they were like going, well, what we could do is this, and they come out with things that you just wouldn't think about. And it was really cool to see that they loved it so much. And it's like, well, look forward to the next thing because they love it, right? So yeah, it's good times.
Yeah. And what was your then sort of progression at head office then? So you'd come in as a sort of a painter and doing some of this background stuff, and where did you then progress to in terms of your next role?
So the initial thing I was doing was painting just masses of troops, basically speed painting stuff. And it was like a fine balance of having the models having to be a certain standard, but also having to be done quickly. So the skill was in doing this stuff fast. The team changed a little bit. Some people left, some people joined. But I basically was just happy to keep my head down and keep doing it. And I didn't really have long thoughts about where my career would go or anything. I was pushed to, like I say, take more ownership of things and speak up more in meetings and give ideas and things like that. And I tried at it, but me being quite an introverted person, it was always a bit of a jump to go and do stuff like that. Okay.
Right.
Now, when Workshop decided to update the paint range, so I remember at the time we were working on Dreadfleet stuff, so we were doing painting guides for it. So I always loved doing painting guides, right? And it's good. I loved doing painting lessons when I was in retail. That was like my favorite thing. And we were working these painting guides. The new paints were coming along, and they were creating this system for it. And then we got trained in what it was all about and why they were doing it, and it fit in very well with what I liked in that I wanted to make the hobby accessible, right? And so this paint range was no longer everyone has their own recipe for painting the skin of an Empire soldier, right? It's going to be, well, what you do is you use these colors and it's going to work, but you can play around with them and do whatever you want. But when someone's starting, like, if you're painting an ultramarine, well, it should be this blue and no longer a case of you mix ultramarines blue with black to get the right shade. So it was good in that way. And this then came on the project where they were doing a book to accompany it. And our whole department was pulled onto this for like 2 months of just making content for it, because it was all stage by stage photographs and things. And it was really complicated, making sure we didn't trip up and forget things. And there were lots of last minute, we've forgotten those photos, having to get models out and stop what you were doing and, fill it in things. Now, as that project was getting towards its end, that's when the TV studio started. which was an oddity because at that point YouTube wasn't very big, and the idea of putting Warhammer figures on in front of a camera seemed like, well, it's going to make it look really boring, isn't it? It's like just looking at the figure, like people are going to think it's rubbish. But there were a few select people who really believed in it and managed to get the studio started. And the idea came about having a DVD in this book that would illustrate how to paint the things like literally in real time. And I remember hearing, oh, that's kind of cool. And then one day, the scheduler lady, she came over and she's like, right, so you're going to be working with them for 3 weeks. And I'm like, what? Well, your schedule is able to, and she showed me on the like spreadsheets, like your schedule's able to open up a little bit for it because they're all working on like dwarf armies and stuff like that. So you can do it. And also, everyone's noticed that you don't chew your fingernails. Oh, oh, okay. All right, are you all right with this? Okay. So off I went to do it. That's where I met Roger. So Roger Yates is my colleague to this day, who I do the academy with, and he'd set this all up, and he had ideas. And as I then later found out, he got the job because he thought he could do video painting guides, and they experimented with setting up this, like having hands literally painting on the video and trying to work out how to do that. And I just became the guy in the chair doing it. And they had to start doing all kinds of things to work me out of bad habits, because at that point what I'd do is I'd lean up and I'd paint the miniature really close, but you can't do that now because they get in the way of the camera. So I had to do lots of practice and just keeping steady from a distance. And I had a natural inclination to lean in, so they hung a pendulum from the sound boom. So if my forehead touched it, I knew I was about to come into shot. So then I'd lean back. They all like little things like that to try and work it out. But it was awesome because we were just left to it. And Roger and I realized we both had very similar attitudes to how this medium could then be used, because I was like, well, so when you're doing a photograph painting guide, there's a tendency to want each photo to look really neat and tidy, which is not actually how it's going to look when you're really painting the thing. And you can also make it more complex for yourself in following a rigid 4-step system for all the colors. And this is what I always struggled with when I was a kid, because the guides wouldn't make sense. I wouldn't understand what it was trying to make me do, whereas the video could literally show it. And you can't hide the fact in the video that the model's going to look like a mess partway through. So I was really excited about it. Roger, after the project, then took the idea and ran with it and kept pushing his boss like we could do something like this. And he managed to talk him into getting me seconded to him for a few days again, where we did a building guide for a Riptide battlesuit, where we just built the whole thing from start to finish with a format that's more familiar to what people would recognize nowadays. He then showed it to his boss, who went, yeah, that sounds cool, give it a go. And so then Roger came running down to the studio door. And by this point, the studio had split up into the miniatures and the publishing area. So I was down in miniatures, and they become super secret on security. So Roger had to knock at the door and ask to see me, so to get me to come through. So this was about 4 years that I've been working in a hobby team at this stage. So I came through, and Roger was like, they want to do a job for it. I think you'd be really good at it. I think you should apply for it. I think we could do something really special here. And I was like, what? I'm really comfortable. I've just been building Apocalypse was on the way, so I've just been doing a Thunderhawk gunship in Raven Guard colors, and I was having a great time. And suddenly I was like, yeah, it's time to leave this job and go and do this thing. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do that. I got really, really nervous and wound up about it. And I was carpooling with some mates at the time who didn't work at Games Workshop. And when we were driving back home, I told them what had happened, and that had just, Roger come down, and the job thing had just popped up on the internal website and it had gone external too. And they were like, you should do it, because if you don't do it and somebody else does it and it turns out to be something really good, for the rest of your life you will know that you could have had a go at doing that. And they're like, actually, they're right. And this was like the moment when suddenly I started taking a bit more initiative on things and actually thinking about my future and what I was going to do. And so I applied for the job, and I nearly didn't get it. There were some other applicants who were very good. Everyone around me thought I was guaranteed to walk into it, which was a bit disheartening, because if I didn't get it, it would have been like the egg on my face, right? But yeah, also there were other people who went for it and were very good. But I managed to, and I got it, and off it went. And again, I was surrounded by people who were telling me it's not going to work. It's a stupid idea doing TV, video things, painting stuff. It's boring. No one will care. No one likes it. And even my manager at the time told me that when it falls through, he'll do what he can to get a job back for me in the hobby team. Right. So yeah, so it wasn't like we were held in high confidence or anything. And so then my first day comes along. Roger's on holiday. So I was working with the other guy at the time who wasn't on this project. So I basically had nothing to do for my first 2 weeks or so. So I was just clearing out the old studio, which at that point they were knocking down to replace it and rebuild it because apparently it wasn't working right. So I was just clearing out the old scenery from the old studio, the old like the old like older Warhammer bits of scenery. We were putting them into storage, and because the studio was just being rebuilt and it was a mess, we ended up being stuck in the back of the scenery room, which we then nicknamed the barrel. So we literally had all the racks of all the Warhammer scenery and our desks, and we were just trying to do what we could. So we had a little desk stuffed at the back of this room, and it was like, what have I done? What am I doing? Being stuck back here. But it just started to snowball. It just got more and more and more, and it just kept growing up to the point where we're at now.
Mm. I mean, you mentioned that you felt like you were quite introverted early on. Obviously, that you've changed in that way, right? Because you're very personable, and on camera you're very engaging. I mean, did you have to work on that as a sort of conscious change?
I don't think I've actually changed. I do think I am still an introvert, and I think Roger would agree with that. In fact, I think all the people we are working with us now would agree with that. It's because um, I'm not naturally outgoing, but I have learned to do it. And a lot of this came from experience in Games Workshop retail, where you have to talk to every customer who comes in, right? So I learned how to break the ice with people, and when I got into head office, then I made friends there, and so I was able to be quite relaxed and confident with it. But early days on camera, I was very tense on it, and it was like, this feels very unnatural and very awkward for me, and also exhausting. So, I mean, recently at Salute, we were there at Salute, and I spent the entire day talking to people, like just person after person after person who wanted to talk to about the hobby and learn about their painting and things like that. And so this is a great example where it's not like I don't like doing it. It's not like, I don't mean to say I don't like to talk to people, but by the end of the day, I am absolutely shattered. And the next day, I just have to be on my own and just play a video game or something like that just to recover. And then, I'm back. But what people see on camera, because we were just left to do what we were, wanted to do at the early days, I was just myself on camera. And because I got used to talking to a camera and I was only there with Roger, I was just relaxed and just chatty all the time. So what was good was when people met me in person and these public things, they were like, "You're just like you are on camera." It's like, that's great. That's great, because then that's genuine, right? and and I think the worst thing in the world for me, something I'd hate myself forever for, is if I was having a bad day and I didn't give someone the time if they were coming up to talk to me about something Warhammer, right? If I was rude or condescending or anything like that, I wouldn't be able to forgive myself for it, because, like, I that's the sort of thing I experienced when I was a kid in the hobby, and I've seen people be put off with that sort of thing before, and I don't want that. I want people to enjoy it, and if they want to learn stuff, I want them to be able to learn it, So it's it's just something I've kind of worked on and embraced to an extent, but it is a skill that I've learned. So to get over that hump of being terrified of public speaking, for example, it is something I just had to develop over time.
Sure. Yeah. Well, you do it incredibly well. So I
Well,
don't
thank
think
you.
anyone would know.
Like, honestly, the community does make it a lot easier. I mean, so I joined a reenactment group, and lots of people I don't know who all know each other. It's quite hard to break the ice or something like that. Then one of them, as it turns out, is a Warhammer fan, and then it turns out about 8 of them are Warhammer fans, and all of a sudden they want to talk to me. So these days, breaking the ice isn't hard when it's a group of people who are into gaming. If anything, it gets a bit awkward when, like, you go to a gaming club and then, like, they start going, "Could you judge our painting competitions for us?" It's a different world now.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned like there was an increase in security at one point, and the studio was separated, and like Roger couldn't come into the area that you were working in. I mean, what was happening there from a sort of within the business and the culture of the business during that time? It sounds like it was, yeah. I mean, what was the nature of those kinds of changes?
So Games Workshop is it's inhabited by a lot of people who are really passionate about the stuff. And so if from on high you get a change in direction, there'll be a lot of people who embrace it. So the result of this is that you tend to get fashions, or is how I think of it. Other people call it the pendulum swinging as to what's hot and what's not, right? So around the time I started in TV, the pendulum was very much swung over in the idea that miniatures are king. And it had gone it was because I think, if I'm right, things weren't going particularly well at that point. Like some of the rule sets weren't being enjoyed very much. And the conclusion was that it's because people really are after the miniatures, and the gaming, that's not actually very important, and we're spending too much attention there. And so when this trickles down, suddenly that swings drastically to the point where we shouldn't talk about the rules at all. So shortly before starting in TV, I do remember overhearing a conversation where someone was saying that they just heard the rules of the Imperial Knights, and they came along. And they're like, "Hey guys, I've just heard the rules of the Imperial Knights. They're so cool." And then what proceeded was a selection of people all stating that they really didn't care about the rules, and in fact, they cared even less about the rules than the guy who just said he doesn't care about the rules.
Right.
Right. And this sort of stuff is obviously not what they actually think.
Mm.
Okay. But and I think this sort of thing happens in basically every company.
Mm.
Right. It's sort of like career stuff, I guess. But that's what led to the times when you were like not seeing points values. And so when Age of Sigmar came out, that very much was like that all over, and that there were no points whatsoever. It's just about the models. People just play it. Then they realized very quickly that no, actually the game is quite an important thing, and so the pendulum starts swinging back. These days, I think it's quite far into the competitive crowd, because Games Workshop seems to think that if the competitive game is perfectly balanced, then that trickles down, and everything in more casual terms will be fair. Now, I personally think that's a bit of a red herring, because I don't think the game can be balanced. And I think if you pursue that, you're just going to be disappointed. Like, there's a certain degree in which it can feel fair, but it can't ever be exactly the same. So I think what you'll see over time is that starting to swing back towards a bit more of a casual focus, and then it'll start going back more towards the miniatures and things. So in terms of the studio splitting up, that was a part of it, in that they decided that rules would be holding back the miniatures. So let's take away the miniatures from the rules writers, and then whatever they make is like totally unbound. They can make anything they want, and then the rules have to gravitate around that. So that's why you see random models and things coming out every now and then. And that's why I theorize sometimes what the miniature is doesn't necessarily connect with the lore that's written.
Right.
Because I think they so pure speculation, right? The Idonith Deepkin.
Sure.
I don't think they're actually all about souls, but they came out during the Soul Wars. So I think that's where that came from.
Right.
Right. That's my, tinfoil hat theory. I don't know if it's true, but that's the sort of thing, like that's how they look. They seem to me to be more about beasts. They look to be more about an Age of Sigmar version of Dark Elves. It's
Sure.
kind of what I think they actually are. But that is because like the miniature we made, then presented to the writers, who then have to write it into whatever narrative and stuff they're doing at that point.
Mm.
For better or worse, it means you get really cool miniatures, but it sometimes means you get weird combinations of things.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, so they really wanted to guard this, right? So it was like the security was really tightened over the miniature studio. Everything was super secret, and so that was fever pitch when Age of Sigmar was being developed. Like no one could see or talk about that. Yeah, but it ebbs and flows and it changes. Yeah, and usually they muddle their way and find the best stuff. But I think when things don't come out, it's because of that sort of tendency. So like the Leagues of Votan rules being too good on first launch, I think it's because of that way they developed stuff, as opposed to how it used to be, where everything was kind of symbiotic.
Right. Sure. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned there obviously the development of Age of Sigmar, and that flowed from the end of Warhammer. I mean, what did you get a sense of? I mean, what was the sort of feel in the company during that? Was that a lot of people excited about it because it was something new, and sort of the not yes man necessarily, but the let's follow the trend, or was there a different kind of feeling there?
Well, the circle of things that I saw of people I was in contact with at that point had very mixed feelings about it. Because when the end time stuff started, there was a lot of excitement. People were like, "Oh, it's going to be so cool! They're going to refresh Warhammer Fantasy," because we all really liked Warhammer Fantasy. Then, when it became clear what was actually about to happen, there was quite a dip in mood amongst people like me, who were like, "But I like my knights." Now, the realities were that Warhammer wasn't selling very well, and that Bretonnians and Beastmen, I believe, were the least popular armies. You could counter argue that, saying that Bretonnians hadn't had a book since 6th edition, right? So at that point, it had been over 10 years and no new models or anything. But whatever, that was the case, and so a decision was being made to overturn all this sort of stuff. So there was Like, you don't want to be the negative guy of like, art is not going to work, this is rubbish. But you did also want to say, I think there are going to be a lot of disappointed people here, and we should probably remember that,
Mm.
right? And be courteous as we introduce this. Um, but I remember that got pushed down by the general trend of you've got to be on board with this. You know, this is what's happening. It's a big risk. You've got to be fully behind it because it's got to succeed. All right, let's be positive. Stormcast are amazing, and if you don't think so, you're the problem. You know, it's like it becomes that sort of. It's not like that was actually said, right?
Sure.
But that's the sort of feeling you get. I do remember, like basically whining a bit about it, I suppose, about like, well, I really like my Bretonians, and I collected Carcassonne, and I found out that in the first End Times book, Carcassonne, for whatever reason, had rebelled against the king, and I was like, but I don't want my army to rebel against the king, you know, like. So yeah, so anyway, I was whinging about it, and then someone overheard. I can't remember who it was, but I got pulled to one side and told, right, so Bretonians aren't really Warhammer. Right? They're not properly a Warhammer thing.
Mm.
They're medieval knights. It's time to let it go, right? There's other stuff. There's better stuff, you know. Like, and I was like, but yesterday they were Warhammer, and you've sold them to me for years, and I found it really hard to adjust for it. Um, but you know, it's like I had any influence or power over any of this sort of stuff, right? So it was what it was, and it's like, right, okay, well, these are the facts. These are why they're doing it. Let's go for it. Over time, it's kind of found its way. You know, you've seen the points come back into it. The style of it's changed. It's becoming more recognizably Warhammer
Mm.
from what it was originally. So it's working itself out, and Old World's back as well. But yeah, that was when I really saw that you have these fashions where it suddenly became fashionable to be really on board with the new stuff and to not really like the old stuff because it wasn't very good, you know. And
Mm.
you'd have some people who were quite far into that mindset, some people who weren't. Um, like any company, it's made of people, and people have different points of view on these sorts of things. And so that's just what happened. Now, I do remember saying, when I was at Adepticon and things like that, I'd be saying to people, I bet you that Warhammer Fantasy is going to return at some point under the guise of Forge World. I thought what it would be as a mod for the rule set, the Age of Sigmar rule set, like how Horus Heresy originally was 40k rules. I
Sure.
thought it'd be something like that. I didn't think they'd go full hog and put square bases back, um, but yeah, I could. I remember betting with people. It'll take 10 years, I bet. And it turns out it was actually more like 4, you know. But this sort of thing happens, and I'm sure wherever people work, they can recognize that
Mm.
that sort of tendency wherever it is.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so just as an individual, I guess you just got to try and keep an open mind, but also try and keep authentic to what the thing is about. You know, so,
Sure. Yeah.
mm,
And so the creation of Warhammer TV then. So
mm,
like you say, there was almost so someone had been quite forward thinking, let's get on YouTube, let's do
mm,
some of this stuff.
mm,
I mean, that's quite a bold move for Games Workshop of
mm,
sort of fully embracing the community through that and putting new stuff
mm,
out there. I mean, what was it like during that sort of first period once it had started to take off, and then you were starting to get sort of, you were becoming almost a public face in a way of GW. What was that whole
mm.
period like?
It was it was very surreal, and I mean, it still is, honestly. So I guess going back to when I took on the job, it was Roger that was like, we can do something really cool about this, and it was my mates who gave me that convincing argument to do it. Um, and we were just stuck in the back of the scenery cupboard, and no one was taking it seriously, but we did our best on it. And Roger, he had a really good, clear idea of what he was trying to show, what he was trying to convey with it. And so he was working out all the camera angles and things, and training me to be a better presenter, because I had a natural inclination to being a teacher already. But he was trying to encourage bringing that out on screen, and he was like, "So what we want to do is to have it as if it's like your older brother's teaching you how to do something. It's that person who sat down with you. It's the retail staff member who's really friendly. He's going to sit down at the table and show you exactly what to do and guide you through it."
Mm.
So all of it was based around that, and we had a good few months of practicing this because no one really believed it. So we didn't exactly have any deadlines or anything. We just kept doing videos on painting ultramarines, and then our boss would watch it and rip it apart with critique, and then we'd have to go back and do it again and again and again and again. And eventually we got to doing the special effects paints, which was the first time we were told to do a video that was actually going to go out. But after that was finished, there was a question as to whether that would be on a DVD with the paints, like with the blood paint. There was not going to be a box, and the DVD was going to be in that.
Mm.
So whilst that was being questioned, the Imperial Knight came along, and this was then going to be a huge release. And so the boss was like, well, why don't we do a painting video on the night? And so, all right, what does that look like? So Roger and I sat down. We worked out, all right, we can only have 15-minute long videos. So let's break this into 4 parts where we build it, we do the painting of the skeleton and the painting of the armor, and then we put the transfers on. There we go, put it up together. And so that was the first time something went up. And it was very slow at first, but we started having people inside the company coming up to us in like the canteen saying, I love that model, but I wasn't going to buy one because I was going to mess it up. But now I bought one, I'm going to paint like you guys did. And then they come back a few weeks later and say they were really proud of it. So we suddenly started realizing that the concept was proven and that it did actually work. And so the boss then was like, all right, well, people liked that. Let's do another one. What's coming out next? What was next? I think it was the Imperial Guard when the Hydra tank came out. And so he's like, so what do you think you guys should do? And we went, well, we should probably paint a Cadian trooper. Maybe we should do tank camouflage as well. And so we did 2 videos on that, and then it got better. And then the end time stuff started coming along. So the Bloodthirster came out, and then, oh, cool, all right. And it really hit a point when we did Nagash, actually, the first end times model. When we did Nagash, because we were able to do stuff like showing the sub-assemblies of it, and then explaining, right, you sort of twisted body into it and you'll hear a click. So before you start painting it, just do this a few times so you're familiar with what happens, because you're going to come back to that after you painted it. You know, like that had never been shown before in any of this sort of stuff. And so we started hearing people latching onto it. Now, I've been told not to look online at all, because this was also during an era when Workshop didn't want to put out any names. But Roger insisted that my name had to be on the video, because otherwise it's like, who's this guy? And he also insisted you had to see his face, because you had to build a rapport with this person to trust them in what they're going to show you. So for this window, I was the only face being put out by the company. And I think we got under the radar in doing it because, again, no one really believed in it early days. And by the time it looked like it was going somewhere, it was fixed. And so it wasn't like you could just suddenly remove me from it. And it just kept growing up and up from there. So it became, I suppose, the best way to describe it, it's like riding the dragon, right? It just suddenly took off, and I'm like, you know, trying to keep up with it. But never at any point in the start of this did I have any idea of what was going to happen or where it was going to go. And it really hit home when I started seeing memes with me in them. Someone did one with like a church stained glass with my face put in it, and they'd written our Lord and Savior and stuff. I just like things like that, and that also made us realize people like this. I think because none of it was about like it wasn't being sold or anything like that, and it was just purely right. So these are all the products, and this is how you use them. You can do with that what you will, but this is how it's supposed to be. And then people would do it, and they go, "Oh my God, that is how you do it." We started getting photographs from stores of receipts of somebody coming in with a screenshot of like the Space Wolf video with all the paints laid out, and just going, "I want all of that." And so, like, all the stores were like, "This is awesome! People are suddenly engaging better with us." And yeah, so it became this thing that our boss was like, brilliant, proven concept. Let's just let that carry on how it is. So it just sort of ticked on as it was. He was then pushing for the idea of sending out box sets to reviewers and things. Like he was the big change in doing marketing. Right. But that really accelerated when Warhammer Community started, and we got absorbed into that fairly quickly. That's when things started becoming a little bit more regimented and a bit more structured. But they were also the ones who started pushing it more and more and more and making more of a character out of me. I didn't ask them to do any of that. And there were actually specific things I asked them not to do after they started doing them. So they started making memes of me and putting them out there. And I found it really weird, so I asked them not to. There was a time they wanted to make merchandise with my face on it. And again, I asked them not to because I thought it was just weird. But yeah, it just kept on going. And yeah, and the proven concept then started meaning that we could get more staff coming in to do it, and we could start exploring different ideas. So the daily thing came along, so we had to restructure our plan for it. But luckily by this point, because during the fairly quiet times I had years of practice in doing this, I was able to drop into it and do it really fast. And Roger understood exactly what was supposed to be made out of it, and he'd really made efficient his filming system, so he could put these videos together really quick. So the two of us formed this really good relationship where we'd be working around each other all the time. So yeah, it was very strange seeing how it changed and became more controlled. But again, like with my times before retail and in retail, I'm sort of nostalgic for that point, because we found ourselves, they made a soundproof filming studio for us. Like I was in the middle of one of the buildings. Like we were surrounded by the White Dwarf office, the photography studio, and a corridor. And when we were in this room, we ended up like obviously we talk a lot, and both of us started going through some quite difficult times in our personal lives with one thing or another, and so the other one would then help us through it, and so we became really, really good friends and became totally trusting of each other, which I think is proven by us leading workshop together and doing our own thing together. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating then to sort of be at the center of that significant change
Mm,
to the company and the way the company it does engage with its
yeah,
audience, I suppose.
yeah. Well, you can
And
see the share price was just rocketing up, so they were like, more of that, it just sort of happened, I guess
yeah,
is what I'm trying to say.
I mean, with that additional control, was there like a more of a push to make it more sales oriented or to focus on specific things, or were you still given that flexibility to kind of do whatever you wanted?
So I didn't really consciously think about it at the time, but I think we had some weight in that we could point at what we'd done and say it works, right?
Mm,
But there were attempts to change things and make us do different things. So there was some of the opinion that what they actually want, what the company wants people to do, is not really spend a long time painting their models, but instead buy lots of models and paint them quickly.
mm,
So there were every now and then we get pressure to do a video where we don't highlight the model or something, and we just do it anyway because we were like,
mm,
well, people are going to want to know how to finish it, right? So it's their choice where they go. So we try and structure the video where we'd say, right, you could leave it at this point if you want to, it's your
mm.
call. And you can actually see an example of this because when the Thousand Suns came out, we were made to paint the entire squad for the painting video. So normally we just paint one guy, so that we could do lots of videos,
Mm.
but we were made to paint the whole squad to try and teach us a lesson that we were painting the models to a too high a standard for the average gamer.
Right.
So what we did was paint the entire squad, and it became one of our most popular videos. But again, the video is like you don't have to do these highlights, but if you do want to do them, this is what you do. So I think because of that success, we were able to kind of carry on. That had a hard end when the contrast paints came along and the videos were forced into doing the battle ready ones.
Mm.
So that was like a decision from on high. You will paint stuff like that to encourage people to paint stuff fast so that they buy more stuff. And I think they got the fingers burned on that quite quickly because they've obviously gone back to the previous format. The fact is, right, that painting your miniatures like that has a place. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing it like that. It's cooler than having the miniatures unpainted, right? But when people are pursuing videos, they seem to want to see what to do if they want to make it better. So if you're going to do something that's battle ready, as the term I got for it, that's totally cool. But you should probably also provide, well, if you want to take it a bit further, just do these little things, and people respond better to that. So yeah, we did find that we sometimes were used. I think they called it wooden dollars, something like that. I wasn't really aware of it. As usual, I generally kept my head down and just did my thing. But we can do a video for this part of the business on this thing, but in return, we'd like this support on this thing. So I think we started getting used in things like that. So that manifested when we were doing Mortarion. So we started doing the Mortarion video. We literally did the intro and put the first color on it, and then we got stopped because we were reassigned onto doing Necromunda stuff.
Right.
So we had to do a bunch of videos on Necromunda miniatures, and then the powers that be were like not bothered about us carrying on Mortarion because that release had already come out then. So it's on to the next thing. So what we'd do is like race through doing the Necromunda stuff, then get a few days in doing Mortarion, then I had to put it to one side and then do something else, then quickly do a bit more Mortarion in between. So it meant that that video came out something like 3 months after the model did, but that came about because of us stubbornly trying to do it in the background. So yeah, it was very different then from how it was early days when it's like basically we did whatever we wanted to do,
Mm,
provided the manager gave the green light to it. So.
sure. Yeah. I mean, just given your obviously so your relationship with the use of you as a character, almost like you say, and from a sales perspective, I know it happened after you'd left, but I just wondered if you had any thoughts about things like the period of only hands and removing faces and removing sort of the personality from some of that stuff. And again, that's changed again, but just
Hmm.
what your sort of perspective looking at that from the outside was.
So I find it a bit weird to understand um, from my perspective. So I think it's worth noting that I got into doing the TV thing without having a clue what would happen. And if my name hadn't been on it, and if it just been my hands, I've been absolutely fine with that, because the focus was um, the star of the show in all these videos, and always has been, always will be, is the miniature that you're painting. That's what people are there for, right? And the fact that they start connecting with me was like just a bizarre offshoot of it. So that's always been like it's like a gift, basically, that people are like that with me. Um, so I find it quite odd to be of the mind of expecting that sort of thing when going in from the start. So um, I can see why it burns if, like, people see what's happened to me going along and Peachy and people
Mhm.
like Louise. If suddenly that's taken away, and it does feel like it's a little bit like a slap in the face to them, I guess. But I think it's also worth remembering that they are just a part of the chain of people who are involved in making this sort of stuff, right? And there's a lot of people at Games Workshop who get no credit whatsoever, who have phenomenally hard jobs. Like the people who take the CAD file and cut it up to make the sprue, that's not an easy thing to do, and it's utterly thankless.
Mm.
All right. There's also the staff members, the average staff members in your store. Like the locals will know them, but retail's a really hard job. It's a really hard job, and again, it's generally thankless. So I, in my mind, it's like, well, you're not the only one out there who doesn't get all the credit. And I realize it sounds a bit, so I was lucky to be in the place I was to get it, for it to go how it was, right? And I'm not like saying I'm taking that for granted. But it's a hard thing for me to get my head around. I think it actually comes from, so I think Workshop understands having these personalities is actually a really good thing for them as a marketing device, because it's like a friendly person that you get to trust, right?
Mm.
Um, and they definitely embrace that with community. And like, so I really liked my Imperial Knights, and so they're like, oh, we can have some fun with it. So when the new Knight Codex comes out, we do those little skits where I'm all like excited about it and stuff, and those are really fun, because what I try and do. So the lady who was filming one of these things, her name's Laura. Um, I was trying to make her laugh. Basically, that was like my goal for the thing. So that's why I was coming out with more and more ridiculous nightly stories and things like that. Um, and then I think that comes across like a genuine thing, and then gets packaged and put out into the community. I think people engage with that sort of thing. I think that is absolutely fine. Um, what I think is, so Roger and I left, and then a number of years later, Peachy left. I think they suddenly got scared of what happens if all of these people left. Like if they make names of them, like I go back to Phil Kelly. What if he suddenly left? Or um, and I think they were just scared of what that might mean. Now, the reality is people are going to leave workshop at any point for any reason, any day, and you can't stop that. Um, and you shouldn't try and stop that, right? If that means it's going to be a good thing for their future career, then it's something to be encouraged. Other people are going to come along. What you want to do is nurture and cultivate good people who are going to be constantly coming in, and let them grow, and then let them move on. Um, so I think it's a bit of an overreaction to take it all away, like assigning names to the presenters, things like that. But I do think it's a case of, well, remember, there's a lot of people who do a lot of good stuff who don't get spoken about every day. So
Mm.
it could be worse, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I hope that
Sure.
doesn't come across as me being like nah or anything like that, Like, like it's a really hard subject for me to navigate. So a number of
Mm.
people have asked me about this kind of thing. Um, but if that's what the company wants to do, that's what they're going to do, and they pay your wage, right? So
Sure. Yeah, and I suppose your perspective is an interesting one, precisely because of your journey with Games Workshop and with that sort of community focus. So yeah, it's
yeah,
interesting to
yeah.
hear it. But you did, obviously, you and Roger did decide to leave Games
Mm.
Workshop and move on from that. I mean, what prompted that decision at that point?
As I mentioned, Roger and I knew each other very well, and Roger had long had a dream of having his own business. It's like a thing. It was this thing to himself, like that niggling thought in his head of like the regret of never having done something you always wanted to do. Right, very much the same argument got me to take on the job in the first place. And we realized one day that because the share price had gone up so much, we'd bought into the share save scheme a number of years ago, right? And if anyone's not familiar with this, basically what you can do is sign up a part of your savings every month, and you're only allowed a certain amount, a part of your wage, and it automatically goes into this savings account, and it lasts for 3 years. When that amount of money matures at the end, you can choose to buy shares at the value that they were when you signed on to this thing, right? So 3 years before. Now, if you think of what happened over the TV period, right? When it was really taking off, it started at about £5 and then got up to something like, I don't know, was it 50 or something like that?
Right.
So you could buy your shares, and then immediately sell your shares and make a large chunk of money.
Mm.
And so that's what Roger and I had done. And we had basically got enough money enough capital to start a company, right? To buy all the gear, which we didn't have any of it. We didn't have a space for any of this sort of stuff. You know, we needed like really good computers and all these kinds of things. And so we were like, right, so we've got money to do it. We've got the reputation. We've got the skills. So if we were ever going to go and have a go at doing this, and if Roger wasn't ever going to achieve this dream, now's the time to do it.
Mm.
And that was the convincing argument of like, well, if we stay here, are we just going to turn back in 10 years' time and think to ourselves, you know, what could we have done for ourselves? So we look at other people like the Perry twins, you know, they left and set up their own, well, they set up their own company before leaving, but they've been really successful with that. Like, you know, and then having talked to them, they love doing their own thing. Like, how cool would that be to be an independent, doing your own thing? So we went home and talked to our girlfriends and wives. Well, girlfriend or wife, depending on who I'm talking about. And both of them were like, you should do that. And I went and told my parents. And again, they were like, you should do that. Now, by this point, my parents had realized that I did actually have like a real job. They'd gone into a Games Workshop store and realized the staff knew what my name was, and that convinced them that I wasn't wasting my time anymore. So they were really supportive. And so what we did was we decided when we were going to go, and we did homework learning how to run a company and what we need to do. And we did research about what we need and all this stuff. And so, you know, when the time came along, we handed down notices and went off and did our own thing. And, you know, we did it all by the book with notice periods and all that stuff. I don't think anyone expected it, but that's how it was. So, yeah, so we left. We set up the business and we were terrified. So that money I said that we had, it allowed us to buy our gear and pay our wages for like a few months, at which point it would run out. So we had a time frame in which we had to get this going. And so we'd worked out a very clear plan with timeframes as to what we had to do, and we just went for it. We were working constantly every day to get things set up. Roger had to learn how to build a website from scratch, right? So we did all of this, and then learning how to get the video working with it and adapting his system so he could do it efficiently, because we also realized that it wasn't like a workshop where we could do a video every few weeks. We would have to put out a lot more than that. We didn't know if people would follow us or if they'd care, and we had to give them value. So we had to start with a library of videos already. So we managed to get ourselves efficient enough that we could do a single video in a day. And then we worked our week around that. So like, okay, so if we do like, if we start out doing 2 videos, then we've got a bit of time for any other extra things that have happened. And then we've got 2 days to do social media and preparation time for next week. And so we kind of worked a system like that. And because we knew each other well, it all worked really well right from the start. And so we went for it, crossed our fingers and hoped for the best. And then we opened the website, and like, thankfully, so many people came along to support us. They were really excited seeing what we were doing. And it went really well. And then COVID did the lockdown, and we had no idea if that was going to kill us or make it go better. Thankfully, it went fine. But yeah, it's just, you know, it feels like a miracle. Everything's just gone from strength to strength. And I think it's because people love what we do, and they love what they get out of it, and we just want to keep on doing that, you know. Yeah. Sorry, I tend to ramble about that sort of thing.
No, it's great.
Quite an intense period of our lives.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Yeah, but one thing that I did just want to touch on was the creation of the Two Thin Coats paint line. So with Trans Atlantis Games, I mean that, because obviously that was like, that became a meme. There's the sort of two. I mean, what does it feel like going from just something that you said that was almost an earnest bit of advice to it becoming like a product?
Well, that's exactly what it is, right? It is just a piece of, if you go into a DIY store and buy a tin of paint to put on your wall, it'll say apply it as multiple thin coats, right? And it's just what you do with paint. But because these painting guides back in the day didn't explain this, it's like a key thing. It's like a keystone of your painting skills, that when you realize that if you put the paint on thinly with a few coats, everything starts working. So not only was I the only guy saying this and the only name being put out by Games Workshop at the time, there was a whole generation of people who tried it and it worked. All right, so that I think is the reason why this took off. So I just happened to be the guy who said that to them for the first time on a big enough platform for it to get out there. So it stuck, and I certainly, I never thought to myself, I need a catchphrase or anything like that. But it stuck, and so it follows me around. And I joke with people, it's going to be on my tombstone, right? Because people say it, people shout it at me in the streets sometimes. Um, so when we got approached about the paints, now I should clarify here, right? We didn't know when we left the company if the academy would work, and we certainly never imagined that we'd get approached about a paint line. We thought it'd be cool to do like a paintbrush as a product or something like that at some point. But then one day we got approached by Bob, who is the owner of Trans Atlantis Games, and he's an industry veteran. He's like run company, like he ran Games Workshop North America for a time, right? He's this kind of guy who's always been in a position of some sort of authority in the wargaming industry, and had a million stories from it. And for the first time, he wanted to do his own thing, and so he came along and he's like, "We'd like to license your brand and to make a paint range. We've got these sort of ideas. What do you think of this? Like, we've got a color wheel. We could do something like that." And we went, "That sounds really cool. We love that you're willing to let us design stuff. What if we did it with this sort of approach, with like a triad system, because it helps people learn? What if we covered these sorts of colors because they're like the core colors people tend to use? What about this?" And Bob practically bit our hand off that we were willing to put that much effort in, rather just slap our name on it. Yeah, we got like a house on fire with them, and he let us. So I get presented from the factory with various bases for the paints, right? Just labeled A, B, C, D and stuff. And so I pick, all right, I like this one. These are colors we'd like. They then mix these together, and as you add the chemical combination for each color, it actually changes what it does to the base. So every one of them has to be fine-tuned. So we'd sit there fine-tuning each one. Some colors just wouldn't cover, so they'd have various techniques they do to make them cover and do these things to them and stuff. But at no point did Bob say, "Could you use the cheaper one, please?" Like, not at all. He just like straight up, "That's what you want? All right, we'll go with that." And then they handled all of that. So the result of it came out as the idea, the goal is to be my perfect paint. And it was only then that I found out I picked all the expensive stuff. Right. I didn't know. I was just like, "Well, that base is best. Let's go with that one. Can you do this to the color?" And they're like, "Sure, but it means getting these expensive things and putting them into it." So it all came out from that. Yes, that's arranged to where it is today, which people really like. And the thing we keep getting people to say about it is that the paint's just really good quality. Because the color's one thing, but the paint having certain traits of how smooth it dries, how strongly it'll cover things, that sort of thing. These things are really important, and they're not what you necessarily think about. So when people try it, they pick up on that, which is great. And people try it because they're willing to trust us because of all the years of the TV stuff. So yeah, it's a very again, it's just like an opportunity that came along, and at this point we were like, right, if an opportunity comes along, we've got to go for it. And yeah, that's where that all came from. Yeah, so yeah, I'm glad people are enjoying using them, because we spent many hours and a lot of stress working on those things.
Sure. Yeah, because you just launched a wave 3, right? Of
Yes.
the paints, is that right?
Yeah. So that was on Kickstarter, and it's currently on GameFound at the time we're recording this as well. And it's done very well. It's I was told by Tag the other day that when you combine the GameFound with what was made on Kickstarter, it's done over $1 million now.
Wow, that's great.
For the third wave of these paints, which is just like I think so. I feel like I've got a bit of distance from this kind of thing, because of all the time at workshop and that. As I say, it all just sort of started around me, and I'm keenly aware that really the person behind the power behind the throne making all this happen was Roger, managing, like, having all these ideas, doing all this stuff, working really hard, basically having a completely thankless job, right? We're talking about the credit. People should understand that Roger's basically responsible for painting videos of the style of what you've seen over the last few years, right? And for the longest time, no one's known he's existed. No, I'm losing my train of thought here. I think what I'm trying to say is there's a lot that goes into this sort of thing, and I've been seeing it for so long that I've got a bit of a cognitive distance from the product or the thing. Like, I view it as a thing that a team's worked on, and it's not me in it. And the paints are like that. So when we hear that they've made all this money, it's like, that's really cool. Well done, everybody. That's awesome. But I don't think of it as me as being a thing in it, if that makes sense.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean,
I kind of want to keep it that way.
Right. Sure. So what then is next for you and for the Painting Academy?
So we're paying attention to what our members are saying, and we want to make the content following along what they like, what they get most out of it, right? And that is breaking down barriers and making things accessible. So we're looking at specifically quite a selection of complex miniatures that we want to address on the website, and complex subjects that we think haven't been done in a detailed way before. So on our website, we've got a courses section, and at the moment that is like a beginner's 101 thing. And I work you through the whole thing all the way through. It's quite cool, actually. Roger works it all out. You get a certificate at the end when you finish it. It's really cool, and it tracks your account as well, so it's unique to each member. It's really cool. So we're going to do another one, and that one's going to be a really fun chat. I don't want to spoil the surprise of what it is, but I don't think people are going to expect it, and I think it's going on these lines of, well, this is a thing that a lot of people want to do but don't really understand how to do it. Here's how to do it in a very bare bones, understandable, approachable way. So yeah, we're doing that on the website. We've got some other ideas and things we're playing around with too, because we're expanding and getting new staff in. So this allows us to do more things. We also have other products in mind. And in fact, we've just commissioned one, which was a big step for us, because we don't know how it's going to go. But we think it's really cool. And so again, we don't want to spoil surprise, but I think it's going to raise some eyebrows. We'll see what we're making. So yeah, but all this is going to be seen this year. So yeah, keep your eyes open. So more stuff, bigger stuff, better stuff is what we're trying to do. So that as a give the people what they want, basically.
Yeah, well, it sounds great. Yeah, very exciting stuff then, from the sounds of things. Definitely stuff to look out for.
Yeah,
no, that's great. Well, I really appreciate you joining me, Duncan, and talking about your experiences and your sort of journey through Games Workshop history, and your sort of, where you've been part of that story. It's been fantastic to chat. So thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, you're very welcome. I'll just I'd like to drop a little Easter egg for people who are into their Warhammer Fantasy stuff here, right? So I think I mentioned I was in the meeting of what was going to be the 8th edition Bretonnian book. As I understand it, it was going to be the next one. It was going to be Phil Kelly writing it, and the ideas they had are not like what you see in the old world. They were going to become a bit more out there and a bit more fantasy, a bit more pagan in style. And if you'd like to see a little window as to what some of that might look like, or might have looked like, there's a guy who left who made Warhammer-like figures for his own thing, right? And his range is called Citizens of the Old World. I believe they're cast in Italy, but if you pop over there, he's got some knights there, which are Bretonnian-like. And if you look at the alternate heads, you'll get a sort of a loose idea of what things were going to start, like what the proposed direction was going to be like. So yeah, that's for all the rest of it. Who knows if that would have all transpired, but it's worth interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be Googling straight after this, as I'm going to be jumping on there and having a look. That's fantastic. Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, well, thank you for that Easter egg and for everything else, Duncan. It's been great.
Hey, you're welcome. Thanks very much for having me, and thanks everybody for allowing my ridiculous job to exist.
I want to say a huge thank you to Duncan for taking the time to talk to me about his experiences in his career at Games Workshop and in his hobby. It was a real pleasure, so thank you so much. If you want to find out more about Duncan Rhodes Painting Academy, then you can find a link in the description where you can go and check out all of the awesome courses and videos and other fun stuff that they offer. And you will also find down in the description a link to my Discord and my Patreon. If you want to support the work I do here, please consider checking out the Patreon if you can. If not, then I would love if you could subscribe, like, and share this video and others on my channel, because that is a huge help as well. Thank you once again to Duncan. Thank you for watching. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.